All right, we're getting to that. Um, I was just gonna go over what your favorite aspect of the film was, whether it was something like the sound or the pacing or the design.
Oh, I think that's really easy to answer for me.
Mm-hmm.
What I constantly noticed was every single sort of shortcut or vignette or scene um, had a really strong emotional component. Like there was no scene that was present that didn't seem to have a very strong intention of like getting a feeling across, if that makes
Yes.
sense. Like, and that really helped both keep things engaging, keep things fresh, um, and keep you invested in the movie.
Yeah, especially in the early on parts of the film where they're establishing character and motivation. Uh, each cut has some meaning. I think you mentioned it kind of felt like a comic book in the sense of the pacing of it, where it's like
Yeah,
boom, cut, here's the image, cut
I, I
on the
think it's
framing.
I think it's also just because each sort of scene I want to call them vignettes because they feel very much like like panels.
Yeah,
They're very
it's
brief, but they're very consolidated, and
and
they
it's
yeah
yeah, it's true. It's true enough that as we said in our watch through, that each individual vignette or character focused sequence could make its own film and would have made another film and probably is another film somewhere, so to
a
speak.
much a much inferior film.
Yes.
No, I really liked it because it not only was it not a single scene wasted, but each scene by itself was a sort of pleasant artistic experience.
Yeah, there's intention behind all the framing and every even most character looks.
Yeah.
Like where they just I think it's most evident to me with the French banker and his wife, the implications of his actions and the way he looks without saying much
Mm-hmm.
really
The sh-
pans out for the quality of that.
yeah, the shot composition is great, but once again, it felt very like not just deliberate, but deliberately presenting like just this moment.
Yeah, it wants you to know and care about each of these characters, which is something a lot of modern films kind of lose, I think, and probably films at the time. But we only really remember the great ones, right?
Like yeah, I think if we're gonna compare it to like the faults of modern movies, which is a bit of a low hanging fruit, but I mean, after after sort of the debacle of like a lot of the recent filmography, um, there has to be something in directing currently that where people are just like, let's make our characters as unlikable as possible and unrelatable and inhuman as possible. And
Yeah,
it's a little bit curious what it is, and I almost wonder if like because these characters, although they show emotion, they're often very like in individual shots. They're often very sort of I don't say impassive, but they don't like say much or
yeah,
you
they're
know
non-reactive or stoic almost.
they're very stoic, right? They're very you know this is a grungy, grimy, horrible place to be. But what really makes it pop and come alive is I think one that there's a certain amount of patience, certainly the intentionality of it, and also just the very liveliness of composition. Is that
Yeah, yeah. Even it, I think what was something. There's a point where we were first introduced to their location down in South America, and I think we both recognized how they set up the entire feel of the place and country in the span of three rapid shots. Uh,
yeah?
yeah, it feels very alive, even if the characters may be a little dead inside. um,
Yeah. So it's very. It's also just very. Another thing that really helps with making it feel authentic is just everything is shot on location. Um, there's an
yeah,
extreme amount of authenticity to it, which is once again another thing that a lot of modern shows tend to struggle with because they're filmed on set, it's green screened, so on and so forth. But I think like right at the start, I said something about the explosion from the bombing being very realistic, and you said, yeah, in fact, that was an actual bombing that they happened to be, it was nearby, so they went and filmed it.
Yeah, they filmed the aftermath of it,
Yeah.
and you're like, this is a very real, practical thing. It's interesting that that's a thing they wouldn't really do in film nowadays. I don't know if that's because of social
I mean,
pressures or just like good taste, but
well, you know, I mean, you can't really imagine like Avengers filmed on site in Palestine.
no. Although, man, what a film that would make. Uh,
You know,
what's really interesting is I think the director himself has said that we just made films differently in the 70s, and I wouldn't recommend doing it again that way. Something along those lines.
probably.
Yeah. Because I think what was it? I think it was 38-ish people, maybe more, who got sent back from filming because of stuff like gangrene and
Yeah, people
malaria.
getting these jungle fevers.
Yeah.
Also, the really tense shot with the bridge was
Yes.
just real. They just drove it over a freaking bridge.
A bridge they built. A minimum of 8, I think it was 8 vehicles fell off that bridge, and one time Friedkin himself was in it, which is pretty amazing.
I mean, health and safety aside, that's some authenticity.
I was gonna
And
say some sacrifice has to be made for art sometimes, right?
I, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
At the very least, we can say, right, the blood, sweat, and tears, genuine blood, sweat, and tears that went into this, really paid off.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
It's a shame that it ever had the potential of going missing. As far as like not being recovered from the 35 millimeter and everything because of rights issues. It's very
horrible.
unfortunate, but it did survive because the director cared enough.
That's good.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's probably thinking, I fell off a bridge for this.
Exactly. At least once.
It also, I think, right, it sets up, among other things, the feeling of physical danger, which a lot of modern shows struggle to do. Not
Yeah.
all of them, but like, how do I say?
I think it comes down to how practical everything is.
Yeah.
Rather than you can whether the argument of whether CGI is getting good enough that you don't notice it now is up for debate. But the fact that if you go into a film knowing that people put themselves in actual danger for it, it really does add to the pressure of it. I think the best example of this would be a movie like that. I guess it would be a B movie called Roar, where they just were obsessed with lions and they filmed with like 40 lions, and and you're like so worried about everybody constantly because people actually got hurt on set.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's one to show you sometime.
Maybe next one.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I guess like those are, if we can summarize the elements that, if I can summarize the elements that I found appealing, it was one, right, this sort of vignette format, 2, the location, or locations that felt very genuine.
Yeah, and gorgeous sometimes. The mountains especially.
Oh yeah. No, very vibrant. Very
Yeah,
vibrant.
which can contrast pretty well with everything else.
It's sort of, I don't know really what to say about that, apart from like, it makes you suspect that the real issue with a lot of digital effects, quite apart from people being rushed to do them poorly and so on and so forth, is that using it to depict something worth looking at in the first place.
Yes.
Is an additional task, which I think people, either because there's so much effort just producing it in digital format, or just because they've neglected it, isn't as focused on. But that's precisely what makes film great, I think.
Yes, I would agree. And some modern film techniques really don't add a lot to that. And then I think if I were to go into something that I thought was great about the film, it's the character work and how quick it's done and how efficiently it sets everything up.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you know,
also,
oh, go ahead.
I think like another thing is everything is sort of said indirectly. Even the dialogue, which directly states, sets things up, leaves unsaid a lot of material. And so that's another engaging factor, right? And it's not just like, oh, we're not dumbing it down or whatever. It's because you have to think about the implications. You have to pay
Yeah,
attention.
when everything's spelled out for you, there's less to think about, and then so you don't think about it as much. It doesn't stick in your mind as much, I think,
Yeah.
so to speak.
And of course, it preserves the authentic feeling.
Yeah, because I think the people in this film talk like people, uh, mostly. There's
For
a
the most
few,
part.
for the most part. There's a few lines and exchanges that are definitely we need to set this up for this movie.
Right.
But generally speaking, when they interact with each other, like the Frenchman feels like a Frenchman, right? And and the American definitely feels like an American. Um, they have the proper spirit in the way they interact felt realistic and how people like that would actually engage with each other.
Yeah.
I don't know many Palestinian terrorists though, so I can't really say if that was authentic or not.
Yeah. Also the few things that didn't feel authentic were just sort of amusing. And maybe that's just sort of a second, that's a subjective thing. But like, when they're sort of trying to sit there inconspicuously, and it felt so conspicuous that we had to sort of point it out while watching. That
Yeah.
didn't take me out of it. It was more of an amusing, situation.
Yeah, there are several points of people sitting very cinematically, so to speak.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know if this is because we were watching it sort of from the standpoint of criticism, positive criticism, but criticism,
Yeah.
the critic's seat. But I didn't feel like there's anything that really ever took me out of the film. If anything, there were moments where we were silent, we got sucked into it.
Yeah, our commentary, which is something I haven't really done much on this channel, but I have edited commentary I'm going to put out at some point. But that aside, there were points where we just didn't talk because it was such a good film that we felt like, I don't know, it was like we were giving it reverence in some way, or respect for what it was.
Yeah, it's sort of the romantic, picturesque. You just go to soak it in. And if there's any sort of romanticism to film, it should be that you intentionally show us something that should awe us.
Yeah, I think a good example, maybe. I'm trying to think of a good example of it happening in the film, and I don't know, because we were kept thinking every time, like say when the oil rig exploded, not oil rig, but the
Yeah,
refinery or whatever.
yeah.
When that exploded, the immediate thought that popped in our minds was how long and how many takes did it take to get that right, and did they have to do it in one go? That's an aspect of the film that I've never seen talked about online, but I'm very curious.
I just thought once again the fire in it was so genuine and
Mm,
real, probably because it
it
has to
was,
be.
yeah, it
There's
has
no
to
there's no
be.
CG fire, but like I don't know the very sort of, I won't say grainy, but the very vibrant color of it really really sells it.
In a way, it almost felt fantastical, even though it was extremely real. Um,
It it's almost weird talking about selling something when it's all real practical effects and often on real locations and so on and so forth. Maybe that's just an element of like, we're so used to computer graphics and stuff that
yeah, that's definitely possible.
we consider how real looking something is.
It's definitely a major conflict point in online discussion of film, I think. it's something that comes up often. I mean, it's been brought up in marketing. I mean, I think with Star Wars and the more recent films, that was the main thing that really brought it out to the forefront. Um, I,
Yeah.
for better or worse. And I think there's some like weird pretension to it too. I prefer practical, obviously, but I don't think CGI is completely out of the wheelhouse of what should be used in film. But in online discussion, it seems that's the stance it's taken. So maybe I'm a little
I think,
controversial in that way.
yeah. And sort of referring what I said before, I think the issue with CGI is not only is it sort of only coming into its own as a technical medium, but it still has to be fully integrated into the classical tools of
Mm.
the videographer, so to
Yeah.
speak. And a lot of the awful failures in the use of CG have been notably because people are inexperienced at integrating it.
Yes, obviously the prequel Star Wars trilogy comes to mind, which is of course why the sequel trilogy focused so hard on how practical everything was because of the
I
backlash against that. But
Which I think is kind of goofy because the prequel stuff, in terms of pure CG, it wasn't bad at all. In fact, they paid a considerable amount of attention to making it fit in using all sorts of practical tools. Um,
yeah, I think it's an overstated criticism of the
I
prequels.
I think where it's really egregious is where they used it to edit in new material in the old films, right?
Hmm.
Because there it doesn't fit in, right? It's not organic, it's not calculated, it's not part of the artistry of the shot in the first place.
Yeah, and I think if we're returning to this film, I'm glad that there was no effort to remaster it in that way. It was just we need to get the film. We're gonna upscale it to the quality, and we're not gonna touch anything else. Um,
Yeah,
I'm really happy about that because I don't know. Can you even imagine a place CGI would work in this film? I really can't.
I really doubt it. They
Yeah.
might do some. You might potentially do some touching up to make the colored sky look a little bit more
Hmm.
natural.
I suppose that last sequence when he's walking through the desert could maybe use it. Maybe I'm being a little too harsh, but I wouldn't change that sequence. I don't think.
Yeah,
Uh,
honestly, I feel like the potential for harming it by quote unquote, you know, touching it up is
mhm. It's
significant.
yeah, and that's. I think this film is a good starting point for a discussion on film preservation in that way. Maybe that's for another time.
Mm.
Um, I think this is the ideal way to handle that sort of thing. I'd prefer they just put the film out as it is,
Yeah,
um,
but yeah,
or as it is, but maybe a little bit bigger with resolution. I guess.
but yeah, yeah. No, I guess like yeah, genuinely, every shot felt like it was being produced by a master of the craft, um, and it really tickled my fancy. And,
Hmm.
I don't think it really would have been as powerful without the combination of both factors. That it both felt extremely genuine and natural on the one hand, right? And on the other hand, that it felt extremely artistic.
Yeah, and I think another thing that this film really exemplifies is the quality of writing that really needs to be there for a film to be great. I think the biggest issue with modern filmmaking is that they oftentimes, a lot like say the Christian movies that people criticize, which I also criticize, they put like a message before an actual story. When rather something like this, the message of or whatever the director thinks comes out naturally in the production of the story. And sometimes you don't even have to have a message. Most of the time, you don't. I think the message is natural. Um, with the end of this film, it's noir. Everybody kind of gets what they deserve.
I think your audio is kind of funky, or is that just my end?
Oh, let me see.
Oh,
Is
that's
it?
better. That's better. I think you were a little too close to the microphone for a second.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if I need to adjust the settings. I'll keep an eye on that for future recordings.
Sounds good now. It could have just
Oh,
been
one
a
minute.
glitch on the internet.
I need to make sure that my camera is all the way where it should be. There we go. I turned it down for a recent thing.
Okay.
There we go. All
Yeah.
right. Technical issues.
Yeah,
Minor technical issues.
I do. What you brought up just now about the message and the story, I kind of want to explore a little bit on what really is, like, maybe not the message, but what kind of story? What's the genre here? What is the, is it sort of a tragedy, right? Would we consider it tragedy? Obviously, you brought up film noir, right? It's a very noir film.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. Let's think about that for a second.
I think it's definitely more of a, if I were to really nail it down, I'd say it's closer to a psychological thriller. Maybe.
That, okay, because it's about the sort of stresses that transform the mentality of these characters, or how they survive.
Yeah, because the focus is really on the characters the entire way through, and everything that happens to them informs their choices and develops them into something else.
Right.
I mean, and some characters grow off screen. I think, like, say, the Palestinian man, he, although to be fair, maybe the bombing was supposed to be self-sacrificial, but you see him later on saving somebody from a accident at a workplace, and then another time he's the one, because he's the only one who could do it, who blows up that tree.
Right.
So maybe there's some sort of self-sacrifice in it. Maybe, and it's interesting because you'd probably argue that he might be the most noble of the characters in the film in that way.
He feels almost the most childlike, right?
Hmm.
In the very specific sense of, like, he's not extremely calculating about benefits to himself. He operates on principle. Right?
Yeah, impulsive. Like, when the assassin kills his
yeah,
his
exactly.
friend.
And it's like, that man is a murderer. He just goes up. While the other characters are sort of standing by, it's like, it's not really our business. And
we need another driver.
We need another driver. And yeah, it's sort of interesting how I suppose it's sort of a deliberate pairing between him and the Frenchman. The Frenchman is a man who's sort of selfish and calculating and has difficulty taking responsibility, and so on and so forth. If I'm not being unfair to his characterization,
I would say so. There's some hints at him maybe doing, like, finally accepting that sort of thing with a letter that's supposed to be postmarked at the end. But that never really even comes to fruition because of how the film goes.
right? Yeah. Is that his tragic flaw? Is he keeps handing off the letter? I don't know, but
I'd say the character who changes the least is actually the Boston Mafia man.
that's true.
Our lead, arguably.
I think
he's the one who survives the longest.
I think that's partially because, right, his theme is that he's haunted by the incident, and that really does come back in that extremely dreamlike sequence at the end in the desert.
Yeah, that sequence is interesting as well in the context of this film, because it's the least real of everything that happens in this, but it doesn't feel out of place. I guess because we're experiencing the kind of delirium that he is in that moment.
I think not only is it sort of appropriate in the moment to have that, dreamlike sequence, I think I would suppose that they've put a filter or used a light for the sky, even if the desert's real.
Yeah, to me it looked as though that was some sort of matte painting. That looked more like a set, that sequence. I'd have to figure out. I didn't really find much on that when I was researching, but to me it felt that way.
Yeah, but what really made it hit hard for me was immediately after the dream sequence, when he's stumbling and finally arrives at the gates, and at that moment we're no longer inside of his head. Right, it sort of takes place outside of him. We're so disassociated mentally that we are no longer in the character, and that sort of makes it hit.
Yes, I agree, and I think also the the eagle on the gate of the building is something of a metaphor as well, or the gate of the camp as they're heading in, with the fire behind it, kind of evokes like a phoenix in a way.
Phoenix,
Like
yeah.
he's kind of, because his character arc is finishing. It really, he never got to complete or he failed the people in his job in Boston, is how he probably views it, as far as I can understand the character. And this time he actually didn't fail them, even though they all fell to the wayside. Um,
Right.
he completed it. I think that's his motivation in this film. And to him, this is his like rebirth moment in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
uh,
interesting. Yeah.
uh,
It's interesting. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
It's interesting to see the psychological aftermath where it's sort of just like sinking down. It's like, I'm not going to drive ever again. I'm just going to leave this. Um, and then, of course, the implication that he's going to die.
Yeah,
And he hasn't actually escaped his fate.
yeah. Even his fate catches up with him. Even though he's the one who kind of got some sort of absolution in a way, some sort of I don't know, restoration for himself. To be fair, what he and his friends did was pretty terrible.
Fair. I do like the twist where it just like, yeah, the guy lied.
Yeah, of course.
I feel like that's like a really. Are we stooping to this? I feel like that's a well done twist because it actually is a twist.
Yeah, it's I want to say something like it's about family. That's what's so powerful about it. But that's a different thing
Please.
entirely. But no, it's a subversion of expectations that has thought put into it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of modern film goers are kind of adverse to or anti that sort of twist. They want something more straightforward now because of how poorly it's been done by hack writers in certain major blockbuster films. But generally speaking, if a subversion is done well, then it doesn't matter, and it can make a film way more compelling. Like I think him getting away scot free probably wouldn't feel as good, even though it's cathartic in some ways. I think him having to die at the end for what he's done ends up making the film feel, first off, more real and grounded, and secondly, just more of almost like a morality story.
I wonder if there's another valence for the eagle, right? Is maybe it's sort of a German World War II German Nazi sort of callback, because it's like, what's the slogan for the work camp? Work will set you free. With the implied irony being, it won't, you'll die. And we have all these characters here who are being told, if you do this job, you'll be free. You could leave this hell of a country. And it turns out not to be the case.
Yeah, and it's probably, that wouldn't be an impossible thing for them to imply either. I think that would make a lot of sense. Especially, I mean, there is an actual Nazi in the film,
Yeah.
who's friends with the Palestinian, the guy who got killed.
Well, they have something to bond over.
Yes, apparently. But yes, I liked in the end sequence as well, where he kind of because it was a Frenchman who kind of had a romantic relationship sort of with the cleaning lady at that bar. But I think the character, Roy Scheider's character, really maybe felt like he needed to take up part of that role, or maybe it was just he felt like I could start new. There's something there that's not exactly explicit.
I think it may be, the way it looked to me was that he was going through the motions of celebration. If that makes sense. Like, now that he's free, now that he has everything he has ever wanted, so to speak, in the film, so to speak.
Yeah.
But he feels empty inside. But he's like going through and doing, he's wearing the clothes, he's dancing with the girl, he's got the letter in his pocket, he's gonna do everything, and we're supposed to sort of feel the emptiness of it.
Yes, that's a good point. And then the final emptiness of that taxi pulling up with the the men established previously in the film from the Boston Mafia
Yeah.
really sinks the whole thing.
And I wonder if in general also, because the theme of death here, right? I think there's a very much of a memento mori theme going, because it's supposed to be relatable, not because we're all criminals from the mob or murderers or financially sunk bankers or anything like that. The point is, right, there's always an assassin coming for you, and that assassin is death, and there's no escape.
No,
life sucks. But how do you face this travail that is life, which is like carrying a truck full of dynamite that will kill you because you're going to die. What do you do?
An explicit theme of this film is fate. It comes up often. I think the most easy to point out example of this is when they're at that fork in the road and they go two different directions and encounter two different kinds of problems.
Yeah.
But and also just all these characters are running from their fates because the consequences are roughly the same. For the Frenchman, the imprisonment for his embezzling is basically death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, like, if we wanted to say, there's a, just like you made The Exorcist, right?
Yes.
That's why. So, if we want to put a sort of Christian thematic on this, then it would be, the wages of sin are death, and like there's no worldly treasure that you will be at peace in.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think the director is relatively atheistic, but what made The Exorcist a morality tale in the way it was is that William Peter Blatty, who is the writer of the novel of The Exorcist, and him kind of bickered like an old old husband and wife during the production of that film, and that like conflict of somebody who's very clinical and straightforward and methodical with his production, and somebody who's very passionate and moral in the story he wants to tell, really created this unique kind of lightning in a bottle film. But to be fair, this film is also very very moral. So there's an inherent kind of morality behind his work anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I don't know. I feel like the place of, we kind of discussed this with Halloween, but the place of morality in film, or like morality in storytelling, is just that it gives a sort of cause and effect, right? You have to have cause and effect in the moral sphere, because otherwise, how are you going to have a logic of a story?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's kind of like, for example, if you talk about karma, right? What is karma? Karma is quite, as far as I understand it, just literally means cause and effect. It's consequence.
That's basically it. Yeah.
So people have to understand stories in terms of moral cause and effect.
Exactly. And film isn't supposed to, as much as we're talking about realism and having it be grounded, film isn't exactly supposed to be just a representation of real life. It's supposed to be. I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase it.
I think the old author said something like, "Art has has advantage over history of being curated. Right? It's better than history."
Exactly. It reflects the values of a society, even if it doesn't set out to do so, whether in the positive or the negative. I think is the best way to put that, and that is evident in this film. I mean, the consequences for everyone, and the self-determinate. I think the conversation about fate is one that could probably go a lot longer in this film. But I also wanted to move on to, if there's anything you really have a big complaint with, what do you think that would be?
Well, I mean, I'm very positive on this film. I understand why you love it. I greatly enjoyed it. it's hard to think of anything that really bothered me. We did have some small quibbles about the music being at times a little. I didn't think it was terrible. Um,
Yes, but there were points when you could really feel that they didn't have the film in front of them when they're composing it.
Possibly, yeah. Although it wasn't a terrible effect even then.
Yeah,
It did
I think
distract me.
when they first set out on the road, there was a bit of music that felt a bit off, but I think that ended up playing to the betterment of the film. It was like a triumphant, here we go, we're off on this journey. Um, that's how it read, and it may not have been. But I think the irony inherent in that kind of made it work.
But yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, definitely. Like this film benefits from irony, so yeah, I struggle to find anything to genuinely complain about in this film, which is, I suppose the highest favor.
I know. In fact, I've been trying to rack my brain. I don't know. I think you could maybe have cut it a little shorter by removing a couple repetitive scenes, but even then, that wouldn't feel right. And I wouldn't want to impact the vision of the director in that way. I seriously have no major problem with it. I think maybe if I could think, there might have been a few lines of dialogue that were ADR'd in such a way that it was a little hard to understand what some people were saying. That was very minor, and you can pick up the context, so it didn't really matter too much.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know. It's a very well put together film. I've never when I first watched it, I was like, well, this is the best movie I've ever seen. And it might still hold that honor for me, but I really can't pick favorites in that way. Because I think different films serve different purposes for different times, much like every other piece of art. To me, saying something is the best just doesn't make a lot of sense nowadays, anyway.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Well, that's I think that's about it. I mean, I don't think we're going to go into too much depth with the individual scenes. We could talk about some of the funny anecdotes, but for the most part, I think it's unnecessary.
Are you gonna leave that in the commentated?
Yeah, I think I'll leave it in the commentated version. Kind of edit in a couple of those little clips from the director. I think that'll be the best way to do that.
If there's, I guess if there's anything else to mention, I know we mentioned it slightly before, but the subtle humor in the movie was pretty good.
Yeah. The humor is basically is at its like simplest level, kind of surprise or contrast, right? And there are a few moments where it felt really. It was definitely intentional. None of the humor in this film was unintentional, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. I mean, it was sometimes external to the characters, like you had to be in the audience to laugh. The whole irony of it. But yeah, the comedy. I think the comedy helped keep it from getting too heavy.
Yeah, I think
not like thematically heavy, but heavy on the viewer's side.
And I actually appreciate that. It's kind of in line with a certain one of our friends who runs a lot of D&D games. He said something along the lines of he tries to make things funny, in a way that the characters would take seriously, but the people watching find funny, or the people playing. And to me, I think that's a good perspective to take, because the characters should be taking themselves seriously.
Yeah,
that's a major problem with a lot of modern films. Is the characters, there's too much self-awareness, too much quirky.
Yeah, the
look
humor.
At me,
yeah, right. It takes away from the danger, right? Whereas like here, it adds to the danger, right? That if the character laughs, it's because something, the situation is so horrible that it becomes absurd. Right?
Yeah, like when the tree is completely fallen over, and he just
Yeah,
laughs maniacally because he's like lost his mind, basically.
yeah. It starts hacking away fruitlessly at the jungle.
And then starts punching the ground. It's like it's the stages of of grief.
I think that's another thing, right, about the character interactions, right? Yeah, you mentioned this. Everybody acted sort of according to their nationality and their characterization and so on and so forth. But like the way it was rationed out, so to speak, right? We were artfully presented with the contrasts. Was also delightful, right?
Yeah,
They
and that,
arrived sort of one by one or by twos, and all sort of react and then react to the others reacting. Um, not in a slow and laborious way, but in a nice, digestible, amusing fashion.
yeah, and there were a few jokes in those exchanges, but in ways that would just be how people would, get to know each other really. Um, and the once they get to know each, they're all very professional people in their own way. So when they're on the job, they don't talk as much. There are times where they're in the truck, and those are great moments. I'd say one of the better exchanges would probably be when they're in the truck, when the Frenchman and the Palestinian man are in the truck together, right towards the end of their time in the film. Uh, and there's a little exchange about the watch that his wife had given him, and it's like, oh, it's set to the time that is in France, Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
That's one of the very comic, tragic elements of irony, right? I mean, you couldn't put it more in your face, and yet it doesn't really intrude because it feels very natural.
Yeah, they're just, hey, we made it over the worst danger here, as far as we're aware.
Yeah.
We're
Here,
we're
let me
fine.
talk
We're
to
on
you
the road.
about my wife that I love that gave me this watch that set has inscribed with the words eternity. Like, well,
Yeah,
you're
and it
not.
also it served to get that watch out of his pocket and into a position where it could be used in a dramatic shot later after the explosion.
Yeah.
So even that was set up. I know a lot of films could probably just do that, but I don't think. I think the thought that's put into each of these scenes is necessary for the overall quality here.
Yeah. If yeah, so I guess I wish more people would make films that were similar in aspiration to this film.
Yeah, this. I mean, this film probably cost quite a lot. I imagine even building just that bridge itself would cost an insane amount. But it was a cost well worth it, and much more worth it than some of these larger movie stars and things that films kind of hang their hats on these days. It's not it's not as necessary. Um, I know that Roy Scheider was a kind of a leading man at the time, but not a major one, and all the other people were kind of smaller stars. Um, they put their soul into it. That was another thing that I really disagreed with Friedkin on in one of his interviews. Is he thought that director, or that lead guy should have been somebody else.
Yeah, who
Um,
was it? Who was it again? It was
I forgot. Sorcerer original
McQueen.
McQueen. I think it was McQueen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Steve McQueen. Yes, you're right. And he asked for way too much because he's a major movie star. Like, I get what I want. My wife should be a producer and all this sort of thing. And Friedkin said no, but for some reason in the later years, he has come to regret that choice. And I think that doesn't work. Somebody like Steve McQueen has too much of a Hollywood face, so to speak, for this kind of role. I think Roy Scheider is just enough of an everyman in the way he looks that it really sells his character and his performance.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the urge once again arising from within me to compare this to the fourth wave Marvel or something. It's like
Well,
well, I
because
wouldn't
what's
even mean
around.
fourth wave, right? But it's like hey, let's get the recognizable actor, Tony Stark. Um,
um,
and,
which is funny because I think he, and aside for that, Robert Downey Jr. might be the only one of those people who was cast because of his real life connections to that character, because of his past habit problems with alcohol and drugs. Which that's actually why he was cast initially, and then the rest of them are kind of like name recognition, or not all of them, obviously.
yeah, and not saying they're like bad actors or poorly matching their characters, but they're very much, I feel, actors that they the actorness of them
Yeah. So all I'm saying here, Friedkin, is that you made the right choice and stop making the wrong choice. You
Yeah.
don't have to
Don't.
worry about it.
Yeah.
um, but yes, I guess any final thoughts here?
Any
Um,
final thoughts? What's another one of your favorite movies? Because I'm interested.
okay.
What are we watching next? You know.
Yeah, we could watch. There's a few. The Third Man, I really like. It's
Uh,
another noir.
I hope
With
that's about Aristotle.
it stars Orson Welles,
Oh,
so that's something. We speaking of that, we could maybe watch Citizen Kane if you've ever seen that.
I
That
have
you know
not. To my
that
shame, I have not. So.
well, it's just film, and then we could do something weird in German like Wings of Desire. Um, there's a lot of options. We'll discuss it and come back next week, or not next week, the week after. Next week is my continuation of okay, yeah, Rings of Power.
Talking gave me strength. Yeah.
Yeah. I just halfway through that sentence, my soul left me for a second, and then it came back and went, "You have to
Look,
go.
you,
You
you
have to
got
do it."
it. You got to be just like Sorcerer, because you will truck on and not blow up.
Ah, yeah, that's another thing we didn't really touch on quickly. The truck itself is a character. It kind of looks like a creature, because of the way it's I guess it's
Especially the one
got-
that blows up.
yeah, the one that blows up, the fender with it missing. You can see like it looks like teeth underneath it. Um, and that was a great choice. And they kind of actually I believe they used. I looked it up after the fact. They did use like big cat noises for some of the engine roars, so it kind of adds to it too.
Mm.
Um, but yes, that's the thoughts on Sorcerer. Great film. I'd recommend everybody go see it if they can find it. I think it's relatively cheap online these days, which is good. Um, Next week will be my Rings of Power continuation. I'm just going to get the rest of it done, get it out there because I want to be over with it, and move on to something better. The week after that, actually, is the week after that Thanksgiving week?
I think so. So next week,
Yes.
yeah, week after, that's Thanksgiving.
Okay. So on Thanksgiving, I will be streaming for a good chunk of the day as like a hey, if you don't have anybody else to hang out with, you can come by. I have a few guests who may be able to produce videos. It's short notice and smaller channel, so it may not happen, but that's how it is. Sleepy and I will probably be doing a competitive playthrough of Journey with me and him trying to race to finish the game. That'll be fun, I think.
I'm pretty sure it's just gonna be a question of do you fall off in the last sequence?
Yeah, pretty much. And then, depending on how taxing that stream is, maybe that Sunday we'll also do something. We'll have to leave that up in the air. I'll put up a post or something if we decide to. Other than that, it's been great hanging out here. Big fan of this movie. Again, please go see it so that it stops being so forgotten. And stay copacetic. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The intro. We're heading out.